I'm going to repeat a few things about communities and some of the work that the League's been doing and some of the issues that we're looking at and that we're trying to get advancement on here in the state because, quite frankly, we heard about a lot of them. Looking at the 7 presentations we had earlier, we're going to talk about entrepreneurship. I'm going to talk about a few things few aspects of that are going on in communities around Michigan and things that we're actually pushing for, headed towards a presentation later. But it was amazing to see, all that basically spelled out in front of us here a few minutes ago by a number of our different communities. So I just want to talk for a couple of minutes about some of the issues that we've been working on at the League and some of the things that we really see out there as being not only items that we're going to explore at this convention, but the things we're trying to do and things we're trying to implement to really turn our sites around. As you all know, several years ago, the League decided through the League board, which I give huge credit to, of getting together and saying, okay, just simply recognizing things as they are and trying to respond to things going on in Lansing or things going on in Washington or to trends happening in our cities and villages, that we were actually going to get out front and try to figure out how we can turn this state around and what role we as community leaders and by definition or by extension your association can play in really moving Michigan forward. So we started on a huge program of research, of fact finding, of idea finding, and really went all over the world, not physically, we could have done that I guess, but talking with experts from around the United States and around the world to find out what makes a place great, what makes an area entrepreneurial friendly, or what makes an area something that people flock to in the 21st century. And as you know, and as we've talked about quite a bit in the last few years, some of it's obvious, some of it are things that you would expect, but a lot of it's not. And one of the things that's not, especially to, quite frankly, state legislators and the media and just people that aren't really paying attention to what's going on in the community, people unlike yourselves who just sort of show up and just sort of like something, but they really don't know why they liked it or what they liked about it, or they really don't understand their experience. We saw that the number one thing is the place itself. I mean, that is now in this mobile environment where people are moving, where jobs can move anytime, where no one really sees himself as working somewhere for 40 years. Everybody's a free agent. Where especially young people are much more mobile than they've ever been. We even see retiring baby boomers making different decisions about where they're going to move to and take all their dollars to. So what we found is that the place matters, and the place itself, the community, if you will, it might be your downtown, it might be a collection of your neighborhoods, it may be a regional area, but the place itself is the one thing that we see as a constant when we look at the areas that are outperforming us economically and areas that are set up to do things as we move forward. So with that as our backdrop, one of the things that we're going to talk about, and this is a copy of the new book that we just published, which we'll get to shortly, but we looked at really the best way to predict our future is to create it. That was Abraham Lincoln's quote. And so off we went on this ride to try to figure out what should we try to create and where we should try to go. Again, looking at our numbers here in Michigan, our quality of life, we dropped in 2009 to 37th in the country in per capita income. That's a 19-place drop in 8 years, which, again, if you are hooked up and working on statistics, you know that a 2 or 3 or a 4-point drop over a decade is a huge trend. So to go from the top third in per capita income to the bottom third in less than a decade is really a lot of us sort of falling off the shelf, if you will. It's an amazing number, and a lot of that has to do with the automobile industry and a lot of heavy industrialization that just kind of went away over the course of the last 10 years. Manufacturing, as we know, it is gone. Manufacturing is an extremely important part of our of our economy moving forward, but it's a different kind of manufacturing. It's a value-added manufacturing. It's something much different, and having an 8th grade education and knocking on the door at Ford or GM or Miller or wherever you are in the state, that just doesn't work anymore. We've got to present a way in which we can do things a lot better. We're not adapting to this knowledge-based economy. I don't think it's a secret to anybody in this room that we're not investing in things like universities, community colleges, our infrastructure, which is now at a point where it's inexcusable and it basically doesn't work. Forget about where we need to go, because the other areas in the country and around the world that we're actually competing with are getting into high-speed rail and great downtown transit and new ways of doing things. And we've got a road system that's about 10 or 15 years behind in just basic maintenance. So there's real problems there. Our talented millennials, they're not staying here. It's a real problem for us. When you talk about, the most important precious resource of the 21st century being brains, and we've got kids that don't want to live here. How many people here know somebody who's graduated from college and gone to Chicago? They just go all the time, and they're going for the place. They're going because they want to be in that type of environment. And of course, our entrepreneurs and our entrepreneurial lifestyles are not where they need to be. But what we know, again, we're knowledge-based, our educations counts, our degrees matter. Technology allows people to live anywhere, yet they're choosing cities. 60 million people around the globe move to cities every single year. It's the most urbanized that the entire earth has ever been, and we see those trends just continuing to move forward. We're not seeing that here in Michigan for a whole bunch of different reasons, but this is a very urban atmosphere that we find ourselves in. And especially when you look at the 78 million millennials, 20-somethings, if you will, think young, think talented, think mobile, they're going to cities. They're going to large metropolitan areas, or they're going to cities sprinkled throughout states. So that's something that's very important to look at. Place attracts people. We've talked about that quite a bit. But we're finding out that things are just sort of all over the map. And again, young people are choosing where they want to live first. Then they're looking for work, and we're in this worldwide competition for talent that we find ourselves in. So those are really the things we look at from an aggregate sense or from a macro sense when we're talking about trying to create places that are going to be sustainable and they're going to be positive moving forward. This is a quote from Rick Carlgard, who is the publisher of Forbes. And if you can't read it, it's kind of light. He says the most valuable resource in the 21st century is brains. Smart people tend to be mobile. Watch where they go, because where they go, robust economic activity will follow. Again, that's somebody from a very prominent business area talking about that and really making that his statement in terms of what's going to move us forward economically. So again, everything points to being these places and having these types of environments that are going to attract people. I mentioned earlier about young people, and we talk about young people all the time because that's when people are most mobile. And when you look at the demographic changes in this particular generation, young people are moving more than they've ever moved before. So if you think, oh man, we're spending too much time on talking about young kids and they don't even know what they're going to be when they grow up yet. 46% of our college graduates leave Michigan. I told you earlier that we're not doing well with millennials, so we actually went out a couple years ago and worked with the President's Council of Universities of the 15 public universities here in Michigan and surveyed 2 graduating classes and found out almost half of them left. And over half of those individuals had job offers here in Michigan, still chose to go somewhere, which is really an interesting statistic and follows, again, that place is the most important thing, and often economies follow that. Again, shifting demographics, automobiles, we're the automobile state, I get that. It's been very important to us, it's still very important to us. This is not a knock on cars, but this is an opportunity to talk about what's important to attracting people. And when you look at automobile miles driven by the ages of 21 to 30, it's now 13.7%. In 2001, it was 18. In 1995, it was almost 21%. So you're seeing young people are choosing to get around in different ways. And where's the mass transit in this state? Where's the high-speed rail? Where are the exceptional walkable communities that are intertwined between large downtowns, suburban areas, even rural communities walking or having those about? So we've got a completely different demographic out there, and I asked you to look at these demographics when we think about our transportation policy, which is something very important here in Michigan that we're looking at changing, if we're looking at that as a real asset in a way in which we can bring people to our state. They choose the best places to do business in the world. And when they did a section on the United States, they looked at these 9 communities, and they picked 9 communities as great places to do business and places that they would recommend going to. These are the categories they talked about when they talked about those 9 communities. So one community is putting culture front and center. There's a zero-emission public transit policy in another community. Renaissance neighborhoods, car sharing, incentivized teaching, smart energy. This is what this magazine that devotes itself to the business culture is talking about when we talk about trying to create jobs. Yet in Michigan, all we ever talk about is tax structure and the regulatory environment. It doesn't work. We're having conversations where we need to be shooting free throws, and instead we're trying to kick field goals. We're just keeping score the wrong way in this state. So when we talk about sense of place, there's 100 different ways to talk about what is a sense of place. And we're always asked, okay, what does place mean? And we've got this new book out talking about place. One says placemaking is about turning a neighborhood, a town, or a city from a place you can't wait to get through into one you never want to leave. And again, I think that's something that people understand. Whether you're from a small town, whether you're from a big city, it doesn't really matter. I read a blog the other day called Streets Blog, and he talked about, the blog started this way. It says, "I love big cities, no matter what size they are. Urbaneness is not measured just by population and square mileage. The big in big city refers to an exhilarating sense that life is flowering all around us in countless varieties." And again, you saw that from the smallest communities up here, Paw Paw 3,300, up to a larger city like Southfield at 75,000, and even here in Grand Rapids hovering about 200,000 in population with a much larger metropolitan region. So when you talk about place matters, and creating those places are things that we can do a great job with in small towns and big cities alike. You will hear from the governor tomorrow, and when the governor came, he's been very solicitous of the league and its members in his first several months in office. One of the things he did is he came and he met with our Board of Trustees in our Lansing office in January, and he got up there and he talked about placemaking. He said, "I don't separate placemaking from economic development. They are intertwined." Because we're going to remind him that all the time. Because now as we've sort of figured out some of the budget issues, and you may agree or disagree with some of the things that the governor did as far as moving forward with some of those budget items, but that's what he talked about doing. He's sort of beyond that, and now it's a time to look at how we're going to invest in Michigan. Economies are regional. Place is regional. You know, there's no city economy or village economy or township economy or county economy. And the dirty little secret is there's no state economy either. There are very specific regional economies all throughout Michigan, and that's the way we ought to be looking at a lot of things. So one of the things we'll be pushing from a legislative perspective on a number of different areas, especially in transportation, is to try to provide some tools which you as local community leaders can work regionally to make some decisions based upon what's best for your region. When we're working on your behalf in Lansing, when we're putting together educational programming, when we're doing our research throughout Michigan, these are the areas that we're focusing on as we move forward in those, and you'll be hearing quite a bit about that in the next few days. So if we talk about placemaking, the most important thing we can do at the beginning of that is some different kind of community engagement, or really an upscaled civic engagement, if you will. Some communities have spent a lot of time doing that through the years, others haven't. I think it's something that you see consistently right now being a very important thing for us to do. And from a technology standpoint, it's so easy to do now. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do sometimes when you've got difficult issues, but actually getting out there and working with your citizens, your business community, and having a real conversation, an ongoing conversation about not just what you do at City Hall, you know, what your budget ought to look like, but what type of community you're out there trying to work on. The path to prosperity, bold leadership. Obviously, this doesn't come without bold leadership. Telling local citizens what they need to hear and not what they want to hear, as many of you, I'm sure, have been in that position over the last few years, takes bold leadership. And I think doing things a little bit differently is something that we've really got to look at. We certainly understand that when we talk about reinventing government and doing things, not just less of it, or not just cutting out services or closing a senior center or something like that, which is hard enough, but actually going out there and changing what you do on a regular basis, and challenging people in your community and businesses and community groups to change what they do as well, is something that's going to require an awful lot of bold leadership, and we're going to be there to help along the time. We've got to have a global understanding. Westland and Livonia aren't as, 20 years ago, they were in competition with each other, sharing a border for businesses, and there's still a little bit out there. But now they're in competition with communities that none of us could even find on a map in countries that we don't know what time zone they're in. So we've got to be understanding that we're in a global environment. And again, knowledge-based education, creating the right quality of place, and those types of things are going to be extremely important as we move forward as well. Got a quote here from Lou Glazer, who's going to join us tomorrow for a couple of different programs. And he talks about from a real positive and optimistic standpoint, which I have a tendency to agree with. I agree with very much, actually, don't have a tendency on it, is that we've done this before. This state created the middle class in this country, and maybe in the world. When you look at what happened at the beginning of the last century, and you look at the governing structure and everything that we set up around our schools, our universities, our philanthropic sector, foundations, whatnot, even community college system, we did some really amazing things. It's incumbent upon us to do that again, and realize, I think, everything from our city structure to the services that we perform to the goals that we're ultimately going for, things that we've got to take on, head on as community leaders and head on as the state of Michigan. Thank you.